The judges weren't ready, and in just a few seconds, the entire room would explode into something no one saw coming. But before I tell you how a quiet Filipino man walked onto that massive stage and earned a standing ovation almost instantly, I want you to promise me something: stay until the very end. Because this isn't just a story about a performance. It's about doubt. It's about courage. And it's about what happens when someone who has been underestimated their whole life finally gets their moment. If stories like this move you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You never know which dreamer's journey might inspire your own. The stage lights were blinding. The audience murmured with casual curiosity, flipping through programs and whispering predictions. The judges leaned back in their chairs, half focused, half bored. They had seen it all before: singers, dancers, magicians, impressions. It took something extraordinary to surprise them now. Then he walked out. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't dressed in glitter or gold. He wore a simple black blazer over a white shirt, slightly wrinkled from travel. His shoes were polished but old. His hair was neatly combed back with a bit too much gel, as if he had practiced that look in front of a small cracked mirror at home. His name was Mateo Reyes. 32 years old. From a small town in the Philippines where tricycles outnumber cars and karaoke nights echo through narrow streets long after midnight. The judges smiled politely. "Tell us about yourself," one of them asked. Mateo swallowed. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone. "I work at a small repair shop," he said softly. "I fix electric fans, radios, sometimes broken TVs. Singing is just something I love." The audience clapped lightly. It was the kind of polite applause given before what everyone assumed would be an average performance. "And what will you be singing?" another judge asked. Mateo hesitated, then answered, "An Elvis Presley song." There it was. A few raised eyebrows. A few exchanged glances. One judge leaned back with a skeptical smirk. They had heard countless Elvis impersonators before. Most were exaggerated. Overconfident. Gimmicky. "Good luck," a judge said flatly. The music began. For a split second, Mateo stood still, eyes closed. And then he sang. The first note cut through the theater like lightning. It wasn't an impression. It wasn't karaoke. It was powerful. Rich. Controlled. His voice carried the deep velvet tone of Elvis, but it wasn't mimicry, it was emotion. It was raw. It was alive. The judge who had been leaning back suddenly sat upright. The smirk disappeared. By the second line, the audience stopped whispering. By the third, someone gasped. Mateo didn't just sing the song, he felt it. Years of quiet practice in cramped rooms. Years of singing after long days at the repair shop. Years of being told, "That's nice, but be realistic." All of it poured into every word. A close-up of his face would have revealed something deeper. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't even about winning. This was about proving something to himself. Back home, people loved his voice, but only at birthday parties. Only at family gatherings. "You sound just like Elvis," they would laugh, clapping him on the back. But when he once mentioned auditioning abroad, the room had gone silent. "That's too big," someone had said. "Be practical," another added. Even his own father, a jeepney driver who worked 12-hour shifts, had gently told him, "Dreams are good, son. But stability feeds the family." And Mateo had believed that for years. Until one night. After closing the repair shop, he found an old radio someone had thrown away. He fixed it out of habit. When it crackled to life, an Elvis song played through the static. Mateo sang along softly. His younger sister recorded him without him noticing. She uploaded the clip online. Within days, it had thousands of views. Then hundreds of thousands. Comments flooded in from strangers around the world. "Why isn't this man famous? He needs to audition. This gave me chills." It was the first time Mateo realized his voice might belong on a bigger stage. And now, here he was. On that stage. In front of judges who weren't expecting much. As the chorus hit, something shifted in the room. The power in his voice soared higher. Effortless high notes. A controlled vibrato that sent goosebumps across the audience. His body loosened. His confidence grew with every beat. One judge's eyes widened. Another covered her mouth. Halfway through the performance, the first person stood up. Then another. Then another. The standing ovation began before he even finished. Mateo opened his eyes mid-note and saw them, hundreds of people rising to their feet. For a split second, his voice wavered, not from weakness, but from emotion. He finished the song strong. Silence. And then. An eruption. Thunderous applause. Whistles. Cheers. The kind of roar that makes the stage vibrate. The judges stood too. One of them shook his head in disbelief. I did not expect that, he admitted honestly. That was incredible. Another leaned forward. You didn't try to be Elvis. You honored him. But that voice? That's yours. Mateo blinked back tears. I've waited my whole life to hear something like that, he whispered. The toughest judge on the panel looked directly at him. You know what I love most, he said. You didn't walk in here acting like a star. You walked in humble. And then you let your talent speak. For yes came quickly. Unanimous. But the most powerful moment didn't happen on stage. It happened backstage. Mateo's phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from his family in the Philippines flooded in. His father, who had rarely shown emotion, sent a short voice note. I was wrong to doubt how far your voice could go. I am proud of you, son. Mateo broke down completely when he heard that. Because sometimes, the hardest approval to earn isn't from judges. It's from the people we love. His journey didn't magically become easy after that night. There were challenges. Online critics who said he was just another impersonator. Pressure to live up to a viral moment. Exhaustion from rehearsals. But something had changed inside him. He no longer saw himself as the repairman who sings. He saw himself as a singer who once repaired fans to survive. And that shift in identity made all the difference. In the following rounds, he continued to perform not as a copy of a legend, but as a Filipino artist carrying his heritage proudly onto an international stage. He added subtle twists. Emotional pauses. Personal touches. He stopped trying to prove himself. He simply became himself. And that's when his performances became unforgettable. The night he made it to the finals, he looked out at the audience and remembered the small karaoke machine in his hometown. The cracked mirror. The narrow street outside his house. His father's tired hands. His sister's quiet belief. Every dream starts small. Every standing ovation begins with a single shaky step forward. So if you're watching this and thinking your dream is too big, too unrealistic, too late, remember Mateo. Remember that the judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe your moment isn't about proving everyone else wrong. Maybe it's about finally believing you were never small to begin with. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there, another quiet dreamer is waiting for their turn, and the next story might be the one that reminds you to take your own shot. And who knows? The world might not be ready. But you can be. They were already reaching for their buzzers. That's how little they expected from him. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how a soft-spoken Filipino man turned doubt into a standing ovation in seconds, do me one favor. Stay with this story until the very end. Because this isn't just about music. It's about rejection, resilience, and the moment everything changes. And if you believe in stories that remind you never to give up, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel because someone out there needs this reminder today, maybe even you. When he stepped onto the stage, there was no dramatic entrance. No flashy lights. No backup dancers. Just a man in a modest gray suit that looked slightly too big for his slim frame. His shoes were clean but worn at the edges. His hair was neatly combed, but a nervous hand kept brushing it back into place. His name was Daniel Cruz. 34 years old. Born and raised in Cebu, Philippines. The oldest of 4 siblings. The kind of man who learned responsibility before he learned confidence. The audience clapped politely as he reached the center of the stage. One judge glanced at the paper in front of her. "Daniel, what do you do for a living?" Daniel cleared his throat. His accent was soft but steady. "I work on a cruise ship, ma'am. I sing for guests in the lounge." A small murmur rippled through the crowd. Cruise ship singer. To some, that meant background music. Safe. Predictable. Not exactly star material. "And what are you singing tonight?" another judge asked, leaning back in his chair. "An Elvis song," Daniel replied. There it was again. The look. The subtle exchange of expressions between the judges. The slight tilt of a head. The silent message, "We've seen this before." Impersonators had flooded talent shows for years. Jumpsuits. Exaggerated lip curls. Overdone accents. It was entertaining, but rarely exceptional. "All right," one judge said cautiously. "Let's hear it." The music began. For a moment, Daniel just stood there. Eyes closed. Shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. Back home, thousands of miles away, his mother was watching from a small living room with peeling paint and a flickering ceiling fan. His younger brother sat cross-legged on the floor, hands clasped tight. His father, who rarely showed emotion, stood near the doorway pretending not to be nervous. Daniel opened his mouth. And the first note silenced the entire theater. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was smooth. Controlled. Rich with emotion. The kind of voice that didn't beg for attention, it commanded it. One judge straightened in her seat. The audience leaned forward. By the second line, the air in the room felt different. Charged. Electric. Daniel didn't try to move like Elvis. He didn't force a southern drawl. He didn't exaggerate the style. He simply sang the song as if it had lived inside him for years. Because it had. When Daniel was 12, his father brought home an old second-hand CD player someone had thrown away. It barely worked. The sound crackled. But one disc played clearly, a collection of Elvis songs. Every night after school, Daniel would sit beside that CD player and sing along quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. Music became his escape from the pressure of being the responsible one. From the expectations. From the financial struggles that never seemed to end. At 16, he started performing at local fiestas. At 20, he auditioned for hotel lounges. At 25, he left for a cruise ship contract, promising his family he'd send money home every month. And he did. For nearly a decade. He watched sunsets over oceans most people only saw in postcards. He entertained tourists who applauded politely before returning to their dinners. He learned to smile even when guests ignored him mid-song. He became background music. Reliable. Replaceable. Safe. But inside him, a quiet voice kept whispering, "You are meant for more." Back on stage, Daniel reached the chorus. His voice soared. It wasn't imitation, it was interpretation. He honored the original spirit of the song, but he added something deeper. Something personal. There was longing in his tone. A story behind every lyric. The camera cut to a judge whose skeptical expression had completely disappeared. Halfway through the performance, something extraordinary happened. A woman in the front row stood up. Then another. Within seconds, entire rows were on their feet. Daniel's eyes fluttered open briefly, and he saw them. Hundreds of people rising, clapping in rhythm. His breath caught for a fraction of a second, but he didn't lose control. He leaned into the emotion instead. Let it fuel him. The final note rang out, powerful and sustained, echoing through the auditorium long after the music stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that feels sacred. And then, the eruption. Cheers exploded from every corner. People shouting. Whistling. Clapping so loudly it felt like thunder rolling across the room. All four judges stood. Not politely. Not hesitantly. Fully. Instantly. One judge shook his head slowly, smiling in disbelief. We were not ready for that. Another laughed softly. You walked in here looking like a cruise ship singer. But that? That was a headline act. Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to process what was happening. I've been singing for 10 years, he said, voice trembling. But this is the first time I feel seen. The toughest judge leaned forward. You didn't come here to copy a legend. You came here to remind us why those songs still matter. And that voice? That's world class. For yes. No hesitation. But the most powerful moment wasn't televised. It happened later that night. Daniel called home. The connection was slightly delayed. The video pixelated. But he could see them, his mother crying openly, his brother jumping in the background, his father standing quietly with red eyes. I thought singing on ships was enough, his father admitted softly. But you were always meant for a bigger stage. Daniel pressed his lips together, fighting tears. For years, he had carried responsibility like a weight. Every paycheck sent home felt like proof of love. But that night, he realized something important. Chasing his dream didn't mean abandoning his family. It meant honoring the gift they had sacrificed to protect. The competition grew tougher in the following weeks. Online critics questioned him. Some said he was just another Elvis tribute. Others claimed he'd never top his audition. The pressure was heavy. There were nights in his hotel room when doubt crept back in. When he wondered if that standing ovation had been luck. A moment. A fluke. But then he would remember the sound of that crowd rising to their feet before he even finished the song. That wasn't luck. That was impact. In the next round, he took a risk. He slowed the arrangement. Added subtle Filipino musical influences. A gentle phrasing that reflected his roots. He wasn't just a man singing an American classic anymore, he was a Filipino artist sharing his voice with the world. And once again, the audience rose. Not because he imitated someone famous. But because he finally stopped shrinking himself. By the time he reached the finals, something had shifted permanently inside him. He no longer introduced himself as just a cruise ship singer. He stood tall. Confident. Not arrogant, but certain. On finale night, before stepping on stage, he whispered a quiet prayer. Not for victory. Not for fame. But for courage. Because courage was what got him there in the first place. When the lights hit and the music began, he sang with freedom. No fear. No apology. And whether he won the grand prize or not almost didn't matter. He had already won something greater. He had proven that humble beginnings do not define your limits. That being underestimated can be your greatest advantage. That sometimes, the world isn't ready for you. Until you decide to show up anyway. So if you're watching this right now and you've been told your dream is unrealistic, impractical, too ambitious, remember Daniel. Remember that the judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe your life is just one brave decision away from your own standing ovation. If this story inspired you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because every week, There's another dreamer out there reminding us that greatness doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it walks in quietly and changes everything in seconds. The judges were smiling, but it was the kind of smile that said, "We've seen this before." And in less than a minute, that smile would completely disappear. Before I tell you how a humble Filipino man flipped an entire auditorium from doubt to disbelief in seconds, stay with me until the end. Because this story isn't just about music, it's about what happens when someone who has been overlooked their whole life finally refuses to play small. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose breakthrough might remind you not to give up on your own. When he walked onto the stage, there was no dramatic backstory package playing behind him. No slow-motion montage. Just a man in his early 30s wearing a simple navy blazer, black jeans, and polished but inexpensive shoes. His posture was straight, but his hands betrayed his nerves, gripping the microphone just a little too tightly. "My name is Rafael Mendoza," he said softly. His accent carried the warmth of the Philippines. Not forced. Not hidden. "And what do you do, Rafael?" one of the judges asked. "I work as a hotel receptionist in Manila," he replied. "But singing has always been my dream." There was polite applause. "What are you singing tonight?" "An Elvis Presley song." There it was again, that subtle shift in the room. One judge leaned back slightly. Another gave a small nod that almost felt rehearsed. Talent shows had seen dozens of Elvis tributes. Some entertaining. Some embarrassing. Few unforgettable. "All right," the head judge said calmly. "Let's see what you've got." The music began. Rafael closed his eyes. For a second, he wasn't on that stage. He was back in his childhood home, a tiny two-room house with a rusted tin roof that rattled during storms. He was 8 years old again, standing on a wooden stool, holding a hairbrush like a microphone while his mother clapped from the kitchen. His father had worked overseas for most of Rafael's life. A construction worker in the Middle East, sending money home every month. Rafael learned early what sacrifice looked like. He learned that dreams were luxuries, not necessities. But music? Music was free. The first note left his mouth. And time slowed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was smooth, deep and velvety, with a quiet confidence that felt effortless. The audience's murmurs stopped instantly. One judge's eyebrows lifted. Rafael didn't move dramatically. He didn't curl his lip or mimic Elvis's famous swagger. He stood still and let his voice carry the weight of the song. By the second verse, something changed in the air. You could feel it. The skepticism evaporated. The judge who had been leaning back now leaned forward, elbows on the table. Another judge's lips parted slightly in surprise. Rafael's voice grew stronger as the chorus approached. There was emotion in it, years of restraint finally being released. Years of singing softly in his bedroom so he wouldn't disturb neighbors. Years of performing at weddings for free, just for the chance to hold a microphone. At 16, he had auditioned for a local contest and been told he sounded too old-fashioned. At 20, he tried joining a band but was replaced by someone with a more modern look. At 28, he nearly quit singing altogether after being laughed at during an open mic night. But every time he thought about quitting, he remembered his father's voice during their late-night calls. "Son," his father once said, "if your voice makes people feel something, don't bury it." Back on stage, Rafael reached the high note before the final chorus. He didn't push. He didn't strain. He soared. The note rang out clean and powerful, filling every corner of the theater. Someone in the back row stood up. Then another. Then 10 more. Rafael opened his eyes just long enough to see it happening, an entire section of the audience rising to their feet. His heart pounded, but his voice never wavered. When he delivered the final line, he didn't copy Elvis's style. He softened it. Made it intimate. Personal. His own. The last note faded. Silence. A breathless, suspended silence. And then the room exploded. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering. Shouting. Whistling. All 4 judges stood. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. Instantly. Raphael blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. One judge laughed in disbelief. "Where have you been hiding?" Another shook her head. That wasn't an impersonation. That was artistry. The toughest judge, known for crushing contestants with brutal honesty, leaned into the microphone. "You walked in here looking like we should lower our expectations," he said bluntly. "And then you raised the bar for everyone else." The audience roared again. Raphael swallowed hard. "I've always been told to be practical," he admitted. "To focus on stable work. And I understand that. But tonight, I just wanted to prove that this dream wasn't foolish." The head judge smiled warmly. "Dreams aren't foolish. Quitting them is. For yes. Unanimous." But the real victory came later. Backstage, Raphael checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of messages. A video from his mother, crying openly. Neighbors gathered around their small television at home, cheering as if it were a championship game. And then a message from his father. "I watched you from the worksite," it read. "All the men here stopped working to listen. They clapped for you. I am proud to call you my son." Raphael finally let the tears fall. Because sometimes, we don't chase dreams for applause. We chase them for validation from the people who sacrificed for us. The competition didn't become easy after that. Social media brought praise, but also criticism. Some called him outdated. Some said he should sing something more modern. The pressure to repeat that magical audition weighed heavily on him. There were nights he doubted himself again. But something had shifted. He no longer saw himself as just a hotel receptionist who sings. He saw himself as an artist who happened to work a reception desk. And identity changes everything. In the next round, he surprised everyone. He blended classic rock with subtle Filipino musical tones. A hint of Kundiman-style emotion woven into a Western arrangement. It was bold. Risky. And it worked. The audience didn't just hear a tribute singer anymore. They heard Raphael. By the time he reached the semifinals, his confidence radiated differently. Not arrogance. Not ego. Just certainty. Certainty that he belonged. On the night of the finals, as he stood behind the curtain waiting for his cue, he remembered being 8 years old on that wooden stool. Singing into a hairbrush. Imagining a crowd that didn't exist. Now the crowd was real. And they were waiting for him. He stepped forward, lights blazing, heart steady. And he sang not to impress. Not to compete. But to honor the journey. Whether he won the entire competition or not almost became irrelevant in that moment. Because he had already broken the biggest barrier, the belief that he wasn't enough. So if you're watching this and you feel like your dream is too unrealistic, too old-fashioned, too far out of reach, remember Raphael. Remember that the judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe the world isn't waiting for you to be perfect. Maybe it's waiting for you to be brave. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own dream, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because someone out there needs to hear that their voice, whatever form it takes, matters. And your standing ovation? It might be closer than you think. They were seconds away from pressing the buzzer. You could see it in their posture. The polite smiles. The half-interested nods. The silent exchange that said, "Another Elvis tribute, let's hope this is quick." But what happened next? No one, absolutely no one, was ready for it. Before we dive into this unforgettable moment, I want you to stay with me until the very end. Because this story isn't just about a standing ovation. It's about proving that where you come from does not define how far you can go. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more powerful journeys like this to life. The stage lights glowed against the massive logo of America's Got Talent. A slim Filipino man in his early 30s walked out quietly, adjusting the sleeve of his charcoal blazer. His name was Andres Villanueva. 31 years old. Born in Davao City. The second of 5 siblings. A former call center agent who worked night shifts and slept through most of his mornings. He didn't look like a star. He looked like someone you'd pass in an airport and forget 5 minutes later. "Hello," said one of the judges with a measured smile. At the center of the panel sat Simon Cowell, arms folded, expression neutral. "What's your name?" Simon asked. "Andres, sir." "And what do you do, Andres?" "I used to work in customer service," he replied softly. "But I left my job to chase music." That caught a little attention. "Oh," another judge leaned forward. "That's a big risk." Andres nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My family thinks I'm a little crazy." Light laughter from the audience. "And what are you singing?" "Elvis Presley." There it was again. The subtle sighs. The raised brows. The expectation that this would be another impersonation wrapped in nostalgia. Simon leaned toward the microphone. "We've had a lot of Elvis singers. So this needs to be good." No pressure. The music started. Andres closed his eyes. Back home in the Philippines, his mother was sitting in front of a borrowed television. The neighbors had gathered in plastic chairs around her. His father stood behind them, arms crossed tightly, pretending not to be nervous. Andres took a breath. The first note left his MO. The judges were already whispering to each other. Not about how good he might be, but about how quickly this might end. The audience didn't notice it at first, the slight lean toward the buzzers, the half-smiles that talent show judges wear when they expect something average. But in less than 60 seconds, those same judges would be on their feet, stunned. Before I tell you how this Filipino Elvis turned quiet doubt into a roaring standing ovation, stay with me until the end. Because this isn't just a performance story. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know when the next breakthrough might sound a little like your own dream knocking. The lights glowed across the massive stage of America's Got Talent. Out walked a slim 29-year-old Filipino man named Marco Alvarez. He wore a simple black button-up shirt tucked neatly into dark trousers. No rhinestones. No flashy cape. No Vegas-style jumpsuit. Just quiet confidence and nerves he was trying desperately to hide. At the judges' table sat Simon Cowell, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Hi," Simon said. "What's your name?" "Marco, sir." "And where are you from?" "I'm from Iloilo in the Philippines." The audience applauded warmly. "And what do you do for a living?" another judge asked. Marco hesitated. "I work as a warehouse supervisor. Night shifts." Simon tilted his head slightly. "And why are you here?" Marco swallowed. "Because I don't want to regret not trying." That answer hung in the air for a second longer than expected. "What are you singing?" Simon asked. "Elvis Presley." A few people in the audience exchanged looks. A soft ripple of "oh" moved through the crowd. Simon leaned back. "We've had a lot of Elvis." Marco nodded. "Yes, sir." "So this needs to be special." Marco simply replied, "I understand." The music began. The first guitar chord echoed through the theater. Marco closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he wasn't standing on an international stage. He was back in his childhood home, a cramped apartment above a sari-sari store. He was 10 years old again, listening to his uncle's old vinyl record spinning on a scratched player. That was the first time he heard Elvis. He didn't understand the lyrics fully, but he understood the feeling. Back then, music was the only thing that drowned out the noise of financial stress and late-night arguments about unpaid bills. He learned early that dreams were risky. Practicality was safe. So he chose safe. Warehouse job. Steady income. Family first. But every weekend, he sang at small-town events. Birthday parties. Barangay fiestas. Cheap speakers. Plastic chairs. People would clap and say, "You sound like Elvis." He would smile politely. Inside, he wondered if he sounded like himself. Back on stage, Marco opened his mouth. The first note stunned the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was smooth, deep, controlled, effortlessly resonant. Simon's eyes narrowed, not in criticism, but in sudden focus. The second line came with a slight tremble of emotion. Not nerves. Feeling. Marco didn't mimic Elvis's gestures. He didn't curl his lip or exaggerate the accent. He sang with restraint, allowing the emotion to build naturally. By the time the pre-chorus arrived, the audience was silent. Completely silent. And then, the chorus. Marco's voice lifted, powerful and soaring. The note rang clean and steady, filling the entire auditorium without strain. A woman in the front row gasped audibly. One of the judges' mouths fell open. Simon leaned forward. Halfway through the chorus, someone stood up. Then another. Then an entire row. Marco saw it from the corner of his eye. A standing ovation. Before the song even ended. His heart raced, but his voice stayed steady. Years of singing through exhaustion, through doubt, through crowded, noisy venues had prepared him for this exact moment. He finished the final note with a gentle vibrato that lingered in the air. Silence followed. The kind of silence that means people are processing something extraordinary. And then, the explosion. Thunderous applause. Cheers. Whistles echoing through the theater. All four judges rose to their feet. Simon clapped slowly at first, shaking his head. "Okay," he said once the noise settled. "That was unexpected." The audience laughed. "I thought we were about to hear another tribute act," Simon continued. "But that was emotional. Controlled. And authentic." Another judge added, "You didn't try to become Elvis. You stayed Marco. And that's why it worked." Marco blinked back tears. "I've always been told to be realistic," he admitted. "Tonight, I just wanted to be brave." Simon nodded. "Well, bravery looks good on you." For yes. Unanimous. Backstage, Marco finally let himself breathe. His phone buzzed non-stop. Friends. Co-workers. Neighbors. His warehouse manager had sent a message, "Take as much time off as you need. We're cheering for you." But the message that broke him came from his mother. "I'm sorry if we ever made you feel like dreaming was selfish. We're proud of you." Marco sat down and cried. Because sometimes the biggest fear isn't failure. It's disappointing the people you love. The competition grew tougher in the weeks that followed. Online critics labeled him another Elvis clone. Some said he needed to modernize. Others predicted he'd fade after the audition hype. For a moment, doubt crept back in. Was he only impressive because expectations were low? But then he remembered something crucial. He hadn't impressed them with imitation. He had moved them with sincerity. In the next round, he took a risk. He slowed the arrangement. added subtle Filipino musical phrasing. Small changes that made the performance uniquely his. The audience responded even louder. By the semifinals, Marco walked differently. Not arrogantly, but confidently. He no longer introduced himself as just a warehouse supervisor. He introduced himself as a singer. Because identity shapes destiny. On the night of the finals, standing behind the curtain, he whispered quietly to himself, "No regrets." The lights hit. The music started. And he sang not to win. Not to prove critics wrong. But to honor the boy upstairs from the Sari Sari store who once believed music could change everything. Whether he took home the grand prize or not almost didn't matter. He had already shattered the belief that practicality must silence passion. So if you're watching this right now and you've been told your dream is too risky, too unrealistic, too late. Remember Marco. The judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe your breakthrough isn't waiting for talent. Maybe it's waiting for courage. If this story inspired you, even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next standing ovation we tell might belong to someone who almost gave up. And maybe it might belong to you. The judges were smiling politely, but their fingers were hovering close to the buzzers. It was the kind of smile that says, "Let's get through this." No one in that room, not the crowd, not the judges, not even the cameras, was prepared for what was about to happen in the next 60 seconds. Before I tell you how this Filipino Elvis flipped out into a thunderous standing ovation almost instantly, stay with me until the very end. Because this story isn't just about music. It's about that one brave decision that changes everything. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You never know which dreamer's journey might light a fire inside you. The stage light shimmered across the iconic set of America's Got Talent. A 33-year-old Filipino man stepped into the spotlight. His name was Luis Ramirez. He wore a simple white dress shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, black slacks, and polished shoes that had clearly seen more than a few years of use. His hair was combed back carefully, but a slight tremor in his hands revealed the nerves he was fighting to control. At the judges' table sat Simon Cowell, arms folded, studying him with that familiar skeptical gaze. "Hello," Simon said. "What's your name?" "Luis, sir." "And where are you from?" "I'm from Quezon City in the Philippines." The audience applauded warmly. "And what do you do for a living?" another judge asked. Luis inhaled slowly. "I'm a bus driver." There was a brief pause. A bus driver. It wasn't the glamorous backstory talent shows usually teased. "And why are you here?" Simon asked. Luis smiled faintly. "Because I've spent my life driving other people toward their destinations. I just wanted to see where my own dream could take me." The audience murmured in appreciation. "What are you singing?" "Elvis Presley." The energy shifted instantly. "Another Elvis." Simon leaned back. "We've heard a lot of Elvis songs on this stage." Luis nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." "So this needs to be very good." Luis gave a quiet reply. "I understand." The music began. For a brief second, Luis closed his eyes. He was no longer standing under bright stage lights. He was back inside his bus, parked at the end of a long shift. The city lights outside flickering against the windshield. The hum of the engine fading. That small moment of silence before he'd pull out his phone, play an Elvis track, and sing softly to himself before heading home. Music had always been his escape. Growing up, his father had also been a driver. Long hours. Minimal pay. Big responsibilities. Luis learned early that stability mattered more than dreams. At 20, he had considered auditioning for a local competition. But when his mother fell ill, he took on extra shifts instead. At 25, he was offered a small lounge gig but turned it down because the pay wasn't steady. Responsibility came first. Dreams came later. Or so he thought. Back on that massive stage, Luis opened. The judges were already preparing their polite smiles. You know the ones. The thank you for coming smiles. The kind they give when they're expecting something average, something forgettable. But in less than a minute, those same judges would be on their feet. And the man they almost underestimated would leave the stage shaking because for the first time in his life, the world finally saw him. Before I tell you how this Filipino Elvis turned quiet doubt into a standing ovation in seconds, stay with me until the end. Because this isn't just about a performance. It's about every person who has ever been told their dream was too unrealistic. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Someone out there needs this reminder today. The lights shimmered across the stage of America's Got Talent. A 35-year-old Filipino man stepped into the spotlight. His name was Adrian Santos. He wasn't wearing sequins. No flashy costume. Just a fitted black blazer, dark jeans, and simple leather shoes. His hair was neatly styled, but his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. At the judges' table sat Simon Cowell, watching carefully with his usual measured expression. Hello, Simon said. What's your name? Adrian, sir. And what do you do? I'm a hospital orderly. The audience reacted softly. Respectfully. That's a tough job, another judge said. Adrian nodded. Yes, ma'am. I help move patients. Clean rooms. Sometimes I sing for them if they're scared. The room grew quieter. And what are you singing tonight? Simon asked. Elvis Presley. A slight pause. Simon leaned back. We've had a lot of Elvis. Adrian smiled nervously. I know, sir. So this has to be special. Adrian inhaled slowly. It is. The music began. For a brief second, Adrian closed his eyes. He was no longer on that massive stage. He was back in a hospital hallway at 2 a.m., fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air heavy with antiseptic and silence. He remembered pushing a stretcher beside an elderly patient who had whispered, "Are you afraid?" Adrian had smiled gently and said, "A little." That patient had asked him to sing something to calm her nerves before surgery. He sang an Elvis song. Her hands stopped shaking. That was the moment he realized music wasn't just sound. It was comfort. Back on stage, Adrian opened his mouth. The first note hit the air like velvet. Deep. Smooth. Full. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. Simon's eyebrows lifted slightly. The second line came with warmth, no forced accent, no exaggerated movements. Adrian stood still, grounded, letting the emotion carry through naturally. He didn't imitate Elvis. He honored him. By the pre-chorus, something had shifted. The skepticism was gone. The audience leaned forward. And when the chorus arrived, Adrian let go. His voice soared across the auditorium, rich and powerful, a high note ringing clear without strain. There was something raw in it, years of holding back finally released. A woman in the audience stood up. Then another. Within seconds, rows of people were on their feet. A standing ovation. Before he finished the song, Adrian's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't falter. He let the energy fuel him, delivering the final line with a controlled vibrato that sent chills through the room. Silence followed. A breathless, suspended silence. Then, the eruption. Cheers exploded from every direction. People shouting, whistling, clapping so loudly it felt like thunder. All four judges stood. Simon shook his head slowly, smiling. That was unexpected. The crowd laughed and cheered again. You have this sincerity, Simon continued. It's not a tribute act. It's storytelling. Another judge added, "You made that song feel like it belonged to you." Adrian blinked back tears. "I've spent years singing quietly," he admitted. "Tonight is the first time I've sung this loud." Simon leaned forward. "Well, don't ever sing quietly again." "For yes." Unanimous. Backstage, Adrian finally allowed himself to cry. His phone buzzed with messages from hospital co-workers who had gathered around a break-room television. Nurses cheering. Doctors clapping. Patients sending video messages. One message stood out. It was from the elderly patient he had once sung to before surgery. "I told you your voice was special," her text read. "Now the world knows." Adrian sat down, overwhelmed. Because for years, he believed his dream was selfish. That chasing music meant abandoning responsibility. But what he realized that night was this: you can serve others and still serve your purpose. The next rounds weren't easy. Critics online said he was another Elvis singer. Some doubted he could repeat that magic. The pressure weighed heavily. There were moments alone in his hotel room when doubt crept back in. But then he remembered the hospital hallway. The trembling hands he calmed with a song. The quiet moments when music mattered most. He wasn't chasing fame. He was sharing comfort. In the semifinals, he surprised everyone by slowing the arrangement and singing with stripped-down instrumentation. Every breath. Every crack of emotion. Every word intentional. The audience stood again. Not because he was flashy, but because he was real. By the time the finals arrived, Adrian stood differently. Not taller, but steadier. He no longer introduced himself as just a hospital orderly. He introduced himself as a singer. Because identity changes everything. On finale night, standing behind the curtain, he whispered, "For every quiet dreamer." The lights hit. The music began. And he sang with freedom. Whether he won the grand prize or not almost didn't matter. He had already broken through the biggest barrier, his own fear. So if you're watching this right now and you feel like your dream is too small, too impractical, too late, remember Adrian. The judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe your moment isn't about being louder. Maybe it's about being brave enough to finally be heard. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there is another quiet dreamer, waiting for their turn. And maybe that dreamer is you. They almost cut to commercial. That's how ordinary it seemed at first. A Filipino man walks onto the stage. Simple clothes. Nervous smile. Announces he's singing Elvis. The judges exchange that look. The audience shifts in their seats. Another tribute act, they're thinking. Another 3 minutes of nostalgia. But what happened next? It turned skepticism into silence, and silence into a standing ovation in seconds. Before I tell you how this quiet dreamer stunned the judges of America's Got Talent, stay with me until the very end. Because this isn't just about a performance, it's about what happens when someone who has always played it safe finally takes the biggest risk of their life. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these powerful journeys alive. The spotlight hits center stage. 37-year-old Filipino contestant Daniel Navarro stood there, adjusting his glasses slightly as the crowd applauded politely. He wore a dark blue suit, not designer, but carefully pressed. His black hair was neatly parted to the side. His posture was straight, but you could see the nerves in the way he flexed his fingers before gripping the microphone. At the judges' table, Simon Cowell leaned forward. "What's your name?" Simon asked. "Daniel, sir." "And what do you do, Daniel?" "I'm an accountant." A few scattered laughs from the audience. Simon raised an eyebrow. "An accountant?" "Yes, sir." "And why are you here?" Daniel smiled softly. Because numbers pay the bills. But music makes me feel alive. That earned a small cheer. What are you going to sing? Elvis Presley. There it was again, that subtle shift. One judge exhaled quietly. Another gave a polite nod. They'd heard dozens of Elvis covers over the years. Some good. Some painful. Few memorable. Simon gave a measured look. Okay. Let's hear it. The music started. For a split second, Daniel closed his eyes. He wasn't on that stage anymore. He was back in his childhood home in Manila. A cramped living room with plastic-covered furniture. His father sitting quietly after long factory shifts. His mother humming while cooking rice in the kitchen. It was his father who introduced him to Elvis. An old cassette tape played so often it began to warp. Daniel would stand in front of the mirror, pretending the mop handle was a microphone. But when he grew older, reality stepped in. Music is uncertain, his parents would say gently. Study something stable. So he did. He excelled in school. Earned a degree. Built a respectable career. But every Friday night, after finishing spreadsheets and tax reports, he would go home, close the curtains, and sing. Loudly. Freely. The only time he felt fully himself. Back on stage, Daniel opened his mouth. The first note came out low and smooth. Not flashy. Not forced. Just rich, controlled, and unexpectedly powerful. The audience stopped rustling. Simon's eyes narrowed, not in criticism, but in concentration. Daniel didn't mimic Elvis's swagger. No dramatic hip movements. No exaggerated accent. He stood still, letting the emotion carry through the melody. By the second verse, something changed in the room. The skepticism evaporated. The judges leaned forward. And when the chorus hit, Daniel let go. His voice soared, full-bodied and resonant, filling the auditorium with warmth and strength. The high note rang clear and steady, held with confidence that felt effortless. A woman in the front row gasped. One of the judges covered her mouth. Halfway through the chorus, a man in the audience stood up. Then another. Within seconds, rows of people were on their feet. A standing ovation. Before he finished, Daniel's eyes. The judges were already nodding politely. You know that nod. The one that says, we'll give him his moment, and then we'll move on. No one expected what was about to happen. Not the audience. Not the cameras. Not even Simon Cowell himself. Because in less than 60 seconds, a quiet Filipino man would turn cautious smiles into wide-eyed disbelief, and earn a standing ovation before he even reached the final note. But before I tell you how it happened on the stage of America's Got Talent, stay with me until the end. This isn't just a performance story. It's about every dream that almost stayed buried. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Someone out there needs this reminder today. 30-year-old Filipino contestant Miguel Herrera stepped into the spotlight wearing a simple charcoal sweater, fitted black jeans, and worn leather boots. His hair was neatly trimmed, his jaw clean-shaven, his expression calm, but his fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. Hello, Simon said. What's your name? Miguel, sir. And what do you do, Miguel? I'm a school janitor. There was a small murmur from the audience. Simon tilted his head. And you're here to sing? Yes, sir. What are you singing? An Elvis Presley song. There it was. The subtle shift. The silent skepticism. One judge leaned back. Another folded her hands together. They'd seen tribute acts come and go. Some entertaining. Most forgettable. Simon gave a measured nod. All right. Let's see what makes this different. The music began. Miguel closed his eyes. For a second, he wasn't on that stage. He was back in the hallway of the elementary school where he worked. The floors freshly mopped. Classrooms empty. Chalk dust lingering in the air. Sometimes, after everyone left, he would sing softly while cleaning desks. One evening, a young student had forgotten her backpack and returned unexpectedly. She heard him singing and froze in the doorway. "Sir, why don't you sing on TV?" she had asked. Miguel laughed it off. But the question stayed with him. At 15, he had dreamed of becoming a singer. At 18, his father passed away suddenly, and Miguel became the provider for his mother and younger siblings. Dreams became secondary. Stability came first. But music never left. Back on stage, he opened his mouth. The first note poured out like velvet. Low. Controlled. Unexpectedly powerful. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. Simon's posture changed almost instantly. The second line carried emotion, not forced, not theatrical, just real. Miguel didn't mimic Elvis's movements. He didn't exaggerate an accent. He stood still, grounded, letting his voice carry the weight of the lyrics. By the time the pre-chorus arrived, the room had transformed. No whispers. No movement. Just focus. And then the chorus hit. Miguel let go. His voice soared across the auditorium, rich, resonant, effortless. The high note rang clear and steady, sending chills through the crowd. A woman in the front row stood up. Then a man in the second row. Within seconds, an entire section of the audience rose to their feet. Miguel's eyes flickered open. A standing ovation. Before the song was over. His heart pounded, but his voice never wavered. Years of singing alone in empty hallways had built quiet strength. He delivered the final note with a gentle vibrato that lingered beautifully in the air. Silence. A suspended breath. Then. The eruption. Cheers thundered through the theater. People shouting, clapping, whistling. All four judges stood. Simon shook his head slowly, smiling. That was not what I expected. The audience laughed and cheered louder. You have this incredible sincerity, Simon continued. It didn't feel like a tribute act. It felt honest. Another judge leaned forward. You didn't try to be Elvis. You were yourself. Miguel swallowed, eyes shining. I've been singing quietly my whole life, he admitted. Tonight is the first time I've sung without fear. Simon nodded. Well, don't ever go back to quiet. For yes. Unanimous. Backstage, Miguel finally exhaled. His phone buzzed nonstop. Teachers from the school cheering in the staff room. Students screaming in excitement. A video message from the little girl who once asked him why he didn't sing on TV. You did it, sir, she shouted. But the message that broke him came from his mother. I'm sorry life made you grow up so fast, she said through tears. Tonight, you look like a dreamer again. Miguel sat down and cried. Because sometimes the heaviest thing we carry isn't responsibility. It's the belief that we don't deserve more. The competition became tougher. Critics online called him just another Elvis singer. Some doubted he could recreate that magic. Pressure crept in. But something inside him had shifted permanently. He no longer saw himself as just a janitor who sings. He saw himself as a singer who happened to clean classrooms. And identity changes everything. In the semifinals, he stripped the arrangement down to pure vocals and piano. Raw. Emotional. Vulnerable. The audience stood again. Not because it was flashy. But because it was real. By the finals, Miguel stood behind the curtain with calm confidence. He whispered to himself, no more hiding. The lights hit. The music began. And he sang for the boy who once believed dreams had deadlines. Whether he won the grand prize or not almost didn't matter. He had already won something bigger. He had proven that your job title doesn't define your ceiling. That responsibility doesn't cancel passion. And that sometimes, the world isn't ready. Until you finally are. So if you're watching this and you feel like your dream has been sitting quietly in the background of your life, remember Miguel. The judges weren't ready. But he was. And maybe your standing ovation isn't waiting for perfection. Maybe it's waiting for courage. If this story inspired you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there is another quiet dreamer, deciding whether to step forward. And maybe that dreamer is you.